Hey, good evening, everyone. Hey, Brandon. Hope everyone can hear me. I wonder if anyone who is joining this evening has been tuning into the other parts of this series, and if so, whether you all have done any of the exercises that I suggested with the example code. I'll return to and ask that question as we get into this and start working through some examples and the additional things that I've added to the Pine script code. But before I get started and before we dig into the Pine, does anyone have any questions about some of the principles that we've discussed in this series so far? Anything that's come up as you've been thinking about this on your own? Have anyone or has anyone looked at the code and thought about making any changes to it? This is the EMA code that I'm referring to. If not, perfectly fine. But it would be interesting to hear any attempts or changes folks have made to the example code. All right. Well, then, if there aren't any questions, let's dig right in. So, in this, just a real quick summary, I'm going to go over a number of these principles. So today we're going to discuss the additions to the code and the principles they're based on. So first, um, we are adding uh, flags. Oh, that's terrible. Sorry. We're adding flags and a counter. We're going to talk about why this is important for price action coding. We are adding most important. So signals, but a variety of different options for those signals. We're going to discuss arrays and so flags, counters, signals, arrays. We'll leave the fourth one blank because I've now forgotten what I coded. So let's get back here. Make sure that no one has any questions before we dig in. We have a few more people here. Before I jump into the Pine script editor, any questions about what we've covered so far in the series, or any additions you might have made to the code that I gave you all to start with? Uh, well, we're not talking about a 3-bar micro channel this evening because this is focused on um, first principles. So 3-bar micro channel would be a separate study. You would need to configure and you'd have to dig in and really either code for it and then collect all of the supplementary data on that, and then um, organize your code in order to optimize for the things that you find when you do your study. But in this case, I'm giving you all of the tools and the principles that you would need to develop that study, and so you could go out and in theory study anything from here. So, quick show of hands, how many people have looked at the EMA code for the study um, with the band study that I published and gave out in the last stream? Anyone used it and not looked at the code? All right. Well, we're going to get into the Pine script editor again and take a look at the additions that I've made. We'll walk through them and why they exemplify the kinds of things that you'll need. Yes, it's on TradingView. There's a link for it. And actually, here, let me just grab the here. Should be. I'll post a link to the new published version. I actually had to pull it down because they said that I violated some guidelines with my publication last time, which was interesting. So I will Let me see where this is. EMA research. All right. Okay, well, yeah, if you just search my name on JRPA on TradingView, Daniel, yeah, the live does get saved, so these will be on our YouTube channel, on the Quant Systems YouTube channel, um, in perpetuity. This is a contribution to posterity. So, um, all right, well, let's dig in. This is already published on TradingView. It's a public script, open source. So, I mean, I wrote this so that people can have access to the code. And the changes we're going to discuss today are not yet published. I will update it after the session today because right now it has a smaller set. The idea was that the previous version gave you some, if for those who are interested in coding for price action, it gave you some foundational principles that you needed to understand as far as generating flags for different events and passing them through signal chains, and then plotting things that you want to see and modifying those plots with different inputs. Today, we're going to look at the kind of the next steps that you would take when developing code, organizing it, and then expanding it to cover more things that you discover as you're going through your research process. So, any questions before we jump in? If not, we'll just jump into the code. All right. So, I'm going to share my screen. Yes, yeah, this is saved, so no worries. You will see it. All right. All right, so can everyone see my trading view? Okay, I'm gonna get out of the way here. This is it's called, you can see it here. This is EMA research. You might find it under EMA_R, but this is the script, JR EMA. Should be able to find it by just looking for that. So the previous script did a number of things, but for this one, I've added flags for the bars that are crossing the EMA, counts for closes above and below, tracking of bar numbers when bars cross the EMA, implemented resetting of variables when the session restarts, and then this is the fake array. It's kind of, I mean, it is a real array, but we'll call it the faux array. Because it's not really, you don't have to do all of the array functions that you would have to do if you were really implementing an array. So let's walk through these and why they are important for price action coding. So I added, the only addition in the settings section is this setting to turn signals on and off. But all of these are new variables. So I added a variable section, which is a best practice. You want to label all of the modules that you have in your code. I like to align all of the integers that I use as flags. So these are all of the different variables that we are going to use to track events and count them. And people have different naming conventions. I like to use for input variables. I like to use underscores and capital letters, so they're clearly distinguished when I'm using them in code, like down here, from variables, which are logic calculation variables. So then here you can see these are all lowercase, separated by underscores, and they are very descriptive. You don't have just like a random, phrase or just, a jumble of words. Like these say exactly what they do. And I left a note here that we initialize the bar count at 1 because obviously bar count can never be 0. So on the first bar of the session, you want it to initialize as 1. And then because we're going to use bar count as part of our data collection here, we have a bar counter. This is a how you would code a bar counter in PineScript. So on the first bar of the session, set the bar count to 1. And then otherwise, bar count is you just add, you iterate. Then here we have the EMA. So all of these are the same. This is all from the previous script. But then this section on the flag bars crossing the EMA, this is all new. And let's walk through these. This is what I went through at the top in the version notes. Oh, let me note about that. It's important when you start coding that you include version notes because you'll make changes and you want to know what you've changed and why, especially if you've done like bug fixes. I mean, I'm sure that some of you will find bugs in this code and let me know. And in that case, I'll do a version 2. And typically you don't want to iterate versions unless you have new features, or I guess you could do it if you had like a substantial bug that you had to fix. But for bug fixes, I would do version 2.1 and list all the bug fixes in that one. So let's get back down here. And let me just double check that we don't have any questions before we move on. Brandon, it is a 20-day, but it is, I mean, you can make it whatever you want. It's not a fixed EMA. As you can see here, if you go to the input settings, you can obviously you can make it a 200-day EMA, or you could put 2 of these on there and collect data on the 200 and the 20, or put 3 of them on. I mean, it's very flexible. But what you see on the chart is a 20. Okay, so back to there. So there are, I am providing you with obviously the PineScript version of identifying crossover and under the EMA, but there are a lot of different ways that you might choose to define a crossover. This is the simplest version, and it's the easiest to explain and to identify on the chart. So, and I just named it crossover. So a TA crossover, you're taking the close value, and if it crosses over, if the bar starts below and closes above the EMA, then, and whatever this input value is, then it is assigning a value of 1 to this variable, and otherwise it is 0. And the same for crossing under. Cross under, we'll get a value of 1 if that occurs. And so what we can do is we can go over here and look at bull cross, bear cross, which is what they're called there. There aren't any from the beginning of the day. But as soon as we get to bar 8, see the bull cross, right? You can see that value tick up. So, but then bar 9 will be a bear cross because it opens above and closes below. So bear cross. So that's the principle. You want to have accurate flagging of the events that occur. But then we go beyond that because that's where you start. You just need to make sure that you're collecting that data accurately. Then this is a binary flag. So it's only ever a 1 or a 0. And these are important for a variety of different events. So like when I capture data on 3-bar microchannels or microgaps, and I want to know, whether any set of 3 bars has generated a microgap and which type. So if it's a strong or a weak bull microgap, I'll have a binary flag. So it'll be either a 1 or a 0. It can only be a 1 or a 0. And then a variety of different methods for counting. And we'll get into that in a minute. So that's what this does. And the EMA close, you can see here, it's either closing above or below the EMA. So the next item underneath the bear cross is the closes above below. You can see all of these are -1, -1, -1, and that's +1. And then it goes back to -1 until you get to here, and then it's positive again. So that's the idea. Binary flags are useful for identifying whether an event happens, and then for using in other modules later in your code as you're doing different kinds of tracking of events, and when you want to combine events into more complex signal tracking. And here's a good example. So now the bar number, we want to know, this is showing us what the bar count was when a crossover or under occurred. So this variable is called crossing bar. And we want to know, because obviously it can't be both a crossover and a cross under. It will be either one. And we want to know what the bar count is in either event. So crossover equals 1 or cross under equals 1. Assign bar count to this variable. Otherwise, it is 0. And so this is one of those really nice Pine script conventions. Not every language uses this kind of, they call it a tuple, where you have it's basically taking this kind of if then statement, like you see here, and writing it out on a single line. So it's if this, then this, else this. That's how you should think of the tuple. So then the crossing bar, we can see here. This bar is bar 8. So you can see down here, this is the bar number of bar crossing EMA. So that's bar 8. And then it'll be bar 9 because 9 opened above and closed below. And then nothing until, there we go, bar 31. And the next one is 37, or sorry, 38. There we go. So that's, as you would collect data, if you're going to do a study on the EMA and behavior around the EMA, that's one of the data points that you would want to be able to collect. Then you can do time analysis, time period analysis. Like let's say you start studying, if you have multiple crosses in the mid-afternoon, right, in the say the middle third of the day, what effect does that have on the day structure that develops? What if you have a lot of crosses and there's a high volatility and most of the bars are greater than the average bar range, or if you have many crosses and most of it is in the mid-session period and it's low volatility. Now there's a variety of different components that you could construct as part of an EMA study that you would want to be able to include the bar count as part of. And so this is the sneaky thing. So let's just go back real quick and make sure that no one has questions. Any questions before we keep going forward? I know we're getting deep pretty quick here. No? All right, let's plot on. So then here we have this is basically, actually, we're going to do this one last. We're going to say that. This is the counting. So counting is very important because obviously the number and frequency of events is important for many of the ways that we calculate or that we calibrate expectations. For example, as we know from Al, that if you have a strong bar on bar 1, I have friends who call them Brooks bars. So if it's basically IBS of greater than 80 or less than 20, they call it a Brooks bar, and it's the probability of having a day that develops into a trend day in the opposite direction of a Brooks bar is pretty low probability. More likely that the day will be some form of a trending trading range day. So that's just one of those things. But you would want to know not just that you had a strong bar, but when you had it, and then afterwards, within the opening 12 bars, within the opening 18 bars, how many pairs of strong bars do you have? How many trading range bars do you have? What's the overlap look like? And so like all of these would go into your study of context and especially behavior around the EMA. So in this case, you need to always treat the first bar of the session differently when you're counting things, because you need to reset variables that are counting, and you need to you don't want to look back and iterate from previous counts, because that would be adding. So like let's just take a look here. If we didn't reset variables on bar 1 and we use the same method of looking back as we do on bar 2, then what we would end up with is iterating from any counts that we had from bar 81 on the first bar. So we'd be carrying over counts by using the same logic. So instead, what we do is we say, if the EMA close is equal to 1, so if the bar closes above the EMA, then total closes above the EMA as 1, and closes above the EMA as 1. Total closes below is 0, so that gets reset, and closes below is 0. That's a binary flag. I'm sorry, this is a count as well. These are both counts. But these are counts of sequential counts, and these are counts of total counts. And same thing here. Does anyone have any questions about this? Because this is a really important concept for anything that you're tracking that is based on a price action, some kind of price action expression. No questions? All right, we're going to keep going. But on bar 2, this logic changes because now for the, and we should say the closes above and total closes are different. Does anyone have any idea why they are different, what they are tracking differently? Any guesses? I'll give you a hint. This has a reset. This has a an if else statement, and this has only a single statement. Any ideas what the difference might be? Well, here, as we can see, this is taking the total closes above from the previous bar. So we discussed in one of our previous sessions that when you have the brackets and the number in it, it's referring to that number of bars prior to the current bar. So if it were 3, it would be 3 bars before 1 is the previous bar. So this is saying if the bar is closing above the EMA, then closes below EMA is 0, and the total closes above the EMA from the end, and that we are going to add 1 to the value of this variable from the previous bar. So this is how you count. So if the previous bar had been 1, and we had a close above the EMA, then this would look at that and say, okay, that's 1. I'm going to add 1 to it. But in the case of this open that we're looking at today, there were no closes above the open. We opened below the open. So the first bar closed below the open, which means that this is 0, and this is 0. And that the total closes below iterated from 1 to 2. And then if the EMA, and so this is looking at this, if the previous, so EMA closes is tracking something different. This is saying if the previous binary flag for the EMA close is equal to 1, is equal to -1. So the binary flag of 1 or -1. So if that is equal to 1, so if the bar before the current bar closed below the EMA, then add closes below the EMA, add 1 to that. Otherwise, it is 1. And that works because what we're saying is we only enter this block if we have had a close below the EMA. So this means that what this is doing is it is only tracking the number of sequential closes below the EMA. So if you break below the EMA, it will start counting. But if you're above the EMA, it will have a 0 value. So this is where you see closes above and closes below. So here on the opening bar, we have 0, and we have 1 close below. And up to here, we have 7 closes below. But here, we have 1 close above, and then it flips to 0 below. But you can see in the value above it, here, total closes below, is still 7, right? That is preserved from here to here. And that's because We want to know the number of sequential closes as well as the number of total closes. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any idea why we might want to track total and sequential closes separately? What the different value might be for a price action researcher? Well, think about the number of like picture a small pullback trend that has been actually let's take a look at the previous day. This isn't a small pullback trend, but spends most of the day above the EMA. We have 1, 2 closes below. If you were just if you were just counting the number of bars below, you might see 2 bars. You could have some kind of EMA based structure or logic that was seeing this as a breakout and follow through below the EMA. Obviously, that wouldn't be a great way to structure a system just around the EMA, but understanding behavior around the EMA and then seeing this spend now 19 closes above the EMA, and now we have 1 close below. So this is our first close below the EMA, second close below the EMA, and then we're back above. So we have 22 closes above the EMA and 4 closes below. Having this data as part of the research that you're generating and using to configure a study is immensely valuable because you know how to process the periods where you have temporary movement across the EMA versus prolonged and accepted transitions below the EMA. So here, these are EMA gap bar. Here, we don't even really get a gap bar. Here, we get a proper EMA gap bar as Alberts defines it. Here, there's your EMA gap bar before the reversal. So that's why you would want to be able to track those separately. They provide very different information that gives you a more complete picture of how you should be thinking about your EMA study. So this is the count versus and 2 different types of counts. So we've talked about the sequential count and then total count. This is the same. And then here I built out a much more comprehensive plot section. So this is plotting all of the new variables we added. I separated them into signals, chart plots. So these are things that are getting plotted on the chart. These are only getting plotted to the data window. If you want to plot anything to the data window over here in PineScript or in TradingView, you still have to plot it, but you just change the place where it gets displayed. Sorry, this should not be here. That should be, there we go. And then here is the signals that I added. So this is not a researched and tradable signal, but the idea here is that you would be able to have a switch that shows the things that you want to study. And so here, this is just all the bars that have a bull cross above the EMA. And we can see those are all of them there. And here you can see that it uses the binary input, so either 1 or 0 from the show signals input that we discussed up here. And then the crossover. So if crossover is equal to 1 and show signals is 1, then plot this. And that's what it's doing. So if you wanted to, after you've done some research on the EMA and you have some data that suggests you should be spending more time researching X, Y, and Z, you can basically take this script and use it as a template to configure the, this is a plot shape function. And if you plot the plot shapes to your chart, then it's just easier to visually identify when these events occur, rather than having to go over and look at the data window and check if when you scroll over a bar, the values change. This can more quickly give you a cross section of the thing that you want to see. And there's a variety of ways you could use plotting shapes. You could plot background colors. You could do a lot of different things. But these are the main tools that you would want to be able to use when you are doing a price action study, because you want to be able to count events uh, in a few different ways. You want to be able to you need to make sure that you're resetting your variables when the day restarts, and you need to be able to refer to, and this is where we get back to this thing. This is a very interesting thing that PineScript or TradingView does. You want to be able to store all the values for something into a container, and that's what an array is. And so this gives you a simple way of using the functionality of an array without having to declare arrays. And so it's this function called TA value when that TradingView uses, and it's basically creating an array once you declare the event. And so here this is saying when crossover is equal to 1 or cross under is equal to 1, refer to the value of bar count from the second to last time this occurred. And this is basically what arrays do, is they you would say capture the bar number whenever this or this occurs and store it into this variable. And then when I want to retrieve it, I have to use a different declarative structure and say array, and then you query the array. You can query it from the front or the back, and there's a variety of different things you would need to be able to do, but it requires a lot more code. And here, this is an easy way of getting to that functionality without having to declare arrays, and it gives you some interesting insights, because here we have, for example, on bar 8, you can see over here the bar number of bar crossing the EMA. And so that's bar 8. But we also have the bar number of the previous bar that crossed the EMA. And we can see that it says there 78. That's 78 right there. I didn't reset this on the day, so that's why you don't see it reset. But now when we get to here, this is 31. And now it shows the previous bar crossing was bar 9, which is the one that crosses right after bar 8. So you can use it to tell, again, this is one of those things that you would be able to use when you're studying periods of the day. So you could get some of that information from the count of the number of sequential closes below or above. But if it's just sequential closes without the bar number of the last event, then you don't understand timing. And timing, as we know in price action, is very important. So being able to capture that and process it in whatever capacity you configure your studies is very important. So let's just go back to here. Does anyone have any questions before we move on? All right, great. Well, we're going to wrap up with a discussion of, so also I'll note I left this here. I did not configure it. I'm leaving this to you all to configure. So this will be something that you can, I've already declared it. You just have to figure out how to plot it. But it's a signal for processing all of the bars within the upper and lower bands of the EMA. And so it will fluctuate, right? That value will change depending on how you configure your inputs. So here, we can see the bands. That's 2 standard deviations. That's the 1 standard deviation, or that's the average bar range. So if you were looking at the average bar range and you were using that signal, it would do something. It'll assign a value of 1 to every bar that has a close within those 2 bands. But then once you have this value at 1, which is already declared, then you can go down here and either plot shapes, plot background colors, do something with that. So I'm leaving that for you all. But the next thing that I was going to suggest, and this is something that I've used at different points more and less actively um, is Claude. And I'm not crazy about using Claude for coding itself. There are some things that I find it good for in coding, like finding errors and for helping me discover new tools, new libraries. So like if I'm coding in Python and I want to know, the different conventions in say polars versus pandas for doing some kind of data frame operation, right? I'll ask Claude because I just don't know. But for general principles, if you're learning to code and you want to know why, or you want to know how you should think about organizing your code or where you should start, that's really where I find these to be the most useful. And so we could say something like, um, I'm just learning to code and I'd like to better understand how I can use arrays to track price action features, which are sensitive to the period during which they occur during the regular trading hours of the S&P 500 E-mini contract. Please explain how arrays could help me understand these multi-event features and propose three methods I could use to process the data I have collected on these features. So then, and it's writing. I should have declared. Hold on. Um, I apologize. Period. I should have said that I am writing in Pine script, not Python. Period. Please update your suggestions. All right. Oh, it's still stuck on version 5. That's fine. So it gives us a helper function, time weighted analysis. So this is an interesting, like, I wouldn't go in and take any of these pieces of code and start using the code. And you can see here that it's using arrays. So this is how you would configure the conditional language to use the array. So you create an array of this size, you add, and you then you add items to it. But here, this is basically suggesting to use a time weighted analysis, pattern detections, and volatility analysis. So, all things that you would certainly be doing, not necessarily using these methods, but you could have a conversation about, say, you go in here and look at their understanding of volatility analysis and say, well, this doesn't make any sense because they're looking at volume. Yeah, so they're looking at volume. I don't measure volatility using volume, but rather bar range, period. Oh, Microsoft dictation. Propose three methods for using bar range to uh, processing the volatility data I have already collected based on bar range. So this is actually normalized range analysis. And so what I find to be most useful, and this kind of gets to, this is a good example actually, volatility regime classification. So classify volatility regimes. You can do this. It's actually kind of what we've already done with the AMA breakouts paint bar. Um, but let me stop sharing. So what you'll the real value I find in using AI when coding is discussing ideas for how to get to a or how to express or configure research around a certain first principle. So if you start from a first principle, explain it and say this is the thing that I'd like to better understand. I have this method that I'm using to approach it. How could I process this data or add something to my data collection to more deeply understand this phenomenon? And in the case of that normalized range analysis, that's actually something that I've used in helping students in quant systems configure their leg strength analysis. So I had a student last year who did a leg counter that was using a strength factor analysis to determine how strong a leg was and how likely it was to get a second leg. Um, and one of the things that we talked about was how to use normalization based on overlap to account for bars that were strong that had strong closes but were not breaking out. So whether it's an inside bar, outside bars are breaking out, but if it's not a significant breakout but has a strong close, you wouldn't logically as a price action trader weight that the same way as you would a bar that has almost no overlap and a strong close and is closing well beyond, say, the opening range. Right, those would have two very very different uh, uh, calibrated expectations. But you have to explain that to the code. And one of the methods that Claude just proposed was to normalize the range analysis. And normalizing range using some other input is one of those principles that you might not have thought of unless you were having a conversation about some of these methods that you might use to understand the components of a study. So I'll be posting this new updated script probably with a different under a different name so that the original and this one are both on TradingView and available. I don't know whether TradingView will pull it down because I published it previously with a few other indicators on the chart, like the opening, the high and low of the previous day, and bar counter, and I think the AMA paint bar. They pulled it down. So I had to republish it with nothing on the chart except for the EMA study code. And now that's on there, you can get that. But I'll republish this, and I mean, it's pretty different. It's sufficiently different that I think I could be able to post two different versions for educational purposes. But we'll see. If they pull it down, then I'll just update the original one. But we'll start at least with you know the two different versions. So does anyone have any questions before I let you go? This has been a fun little series. You all can let me know in the comments if it's something that you would want to add some installments for. I mean, this seems like we've gotten pretty substantial in some of the principles we've covered, and I don't want to really go much farther without having some pretty coherent direction from those who are participating because it can get not terribly useful at some point. So let me know what you all think in the comments, and I'll take a look and see if this is something we want to continue, or if we leave it at this, and you all can just use the code as you will. Otherwise, have a good evening. Talk to y'all later. Have a good night.